The most feared man in Seoul couldn't stand up from his own wheelchair. Kang Ji-hwan, the man who made entire crime families disappear overnight, who built an empire on silence and broken bones, was being poisoned by the woman who shared his bed. And the only person who figured it out was a plus-size Black American physical therapist from Atlanta who nobody in that mansion took seriously. This is a story about power, betrayal, and what real strength actually looks like. Stay until the end. Hit that like button and drop your city in the comments. I want to see how far this story travels. What? The bullet had not killed him. That was the first thing Kang Ji-hwan thought when he opened his eyes in the recovery room of his private medical facility beneath the Han River mansion. Not gratitude, not relief, not the slow creeping awareness of pain that the doctors kept apologizing for. Just that single flat fact, cold and hard as a stone pressed against the back of his teeth. The bullet had not killed him. Whoever had sent it would need to reckon with that. The second thing he thought was that his right leg felt like it belonged to someone else. He tried to move it. Nothing happened. Nothing in the sense of weakness or stiffness. Nothing in the sense of complete disconnection, as if the leg had simply ceased to be part of him, as if it had filed its resignation and left without notice. Dr. Lim, the syndicate's chief physician, stood at the foot of the bed with the particular careful expression of a man who has rehearsed bad news enough times that it no longer frightened him to deliver it, only exhausted him. The nerve damage is significant, Dr. Lim said. The round fragmented. One piece lodged close to the lumbar plexus. We extracted what we could, but the inflammation, will I walk? Not a question. Ji-hwan's voice was flat, stripped of inflection. The same voice he used when he wanted someone to understand that the window for softening information had already closed. Dr. Lim pressed his lips together. With aggressive rehabilitation, there is a reasonable possibility of partial, will I walk the way I walked before? The doctor did not answer immediately, and in that pause, Ji-hwan got his answer. He turned his head toward the window. Outside, the Han River lay gray and still under an overcast March sky, and somewhere out there, the city continued its business without him, indifferent as water. Get out, Ji-hwan said. Dr. Lim got out. Ji-hwan lay in the bed for a long time after that, staring at the ceiling. The pain was there. It was always there. A deep grinding ache that lived in his hip and radiated downward into a leg he couldn't feel. But pain had never particularly frightened him. What frightened him, though he would not have used that word even inside his own skull, was the silence. Black Phoenix Syndicate ran on the perception of its leader's absolute invulnerability. That perception was now cracked, and in the world Ji-hwan operated in, a crack was an invitation. He could already feel them circling. Not physically. His security detail was thorough. His perimeter was clean. The men who had tried to kill him 3 days ago in the parking structure of his Gangnam office tower were already being located and disassembled. But within the organization itself, among the senior executives and territorial commanders who had sworn loyalty and meant it only as long as loyalty remained profitable, Ji-hwan could feel the calculation beginning, the weighing, the quiet repositioning. A wounded man at the top of a criminal empire was not a man at the top for long. He knew this better than anyone. He had built Black Phoenix by moving fast when others hesitated, by reading weakness before it became visible, by acting before the moment fully announced itself. Now he was on the other side of that equation, and the irony of it sat in his chest like a second bullet. His fiancée came to see him that evening. Han Seo-rin arrived the way she always arrived, composed, immaculate, wrapped in a cream-colored silk blouse that probably cost more than some of his junior operatives made in a month. She was 31 years old and breathtakingly beautiful in the particular way of women who have treated their beauty as a career, who have studied it and cultivated it and deployed it with the precision of a specialist. She had been engaged to Ji-hwan for 14 months. He had chosen her because she was intelligent, because she understood the world he operated in without needing it explained, and because she was ambitious enough to never be boring. She sat beside his bed, took his hand, and looked at him with exactly the right combination of concern and composure. The security team says it was Cho Byung-soo's people, she said. Probably. They'll handle it? They're already handling it. She nodded, smoothed a non-existent wrinkle from the edge of his sheet. Dr. Lim told me about the nerve damage. Ji-hwan said nothing. I want to bring in a rehabilitation specialist, Seorin continued. Someone outside the usual network. I've already been making inquiries. There's a therapist currently working in Seoul, very well regarded, international training. I think she'd be appropriate. Ji-hwan looked at her. She. Yes. A small pause, perfectly calibrated. Does that matter? He looked back at the ceiling. Set it up. Seorin squeezed his hand once, stood, straightened her blouse, and left. Ji-hwan watched her go and felt something he could not name, something faint and sourceless, like a sound just below the threshold of hearing. He filed it away under irrelevant and closed his eyes. He did not sleep. Zuri Bennett arrived at the Kang compound on a Wednesday morning in late March, 40 minutes early, with a rolling equipment case, a canvas tote bag containing her client files, and the particular internal steadiness of a woman who had learned long ago that showing up nervous was a form of surrender she couldn't afford. She was 34 years old, originally from Atlanta, currently 3 years into what had started as a 2-year adventure in Seoul and had quietly become her life. She was black, she was plus size, and she had developed very early in her career the ability to read rooms that were not built with her in mind and perform in them anyway. Physical therapy had a way of stripping environments down to their essentials. Pain was pain, muscle was muscle, recovery was recovery. And she had found that expertise, delivered with calm and precision, had a way of eventually overriding most other variables. Most, not all. The Kang compound was a different category of environment. The mansion sat behind a perimeter wall on a private stretch of river frontage, and the security checkpoint at the gate involved 3 men with the particular flat effect of professionals who did violence without drama. A vehicle inspection that she suspected was more thorough than anything she'd experienced at an actual international border, and a wait of nearly 15 minutes while her credentials were verified against what appeared to be multiple separate databases. She stood in the cold March air and waited, because she had learned that how a person waits tells other people everything. A 4th man eventually escorted her to a side entrance through a service corridor that she noted was cleaner than most hospitals she'd worked in, and into a ground floor room that had been converted into a rehabilitation suite. The equipment was good. Better than good, actually. Someone had spent serious money putting this room together, which meant someone took the recovery seriously, which was the first genuinely encouraging sign she'd encountered since stepping through that gate. She was setting up her assessment materials when she heard him. She had been given a file, of course. Photographs, medical history. The injury report that had been sanitized to remove anything operationally sensitive, which meant it contained about 60% of the information she actually needed. She knew what Kang Ji-hwan looked like. She knew he was 42, that he had been shot 3 days ago, that the nerve damage was real and significant, and that the prognosis was genuinely uncertain. What the file hadn't prepared her for was the quality of his silence. He came in on a wheelchair pushed by a bodyguard, a massive man named Park, who had the proportions of someone assembled rather than born, and Ji-hwan sat in it with the particular rigid stillness of a man who had decided that if he couldn't control the wheelchair, he would at least control everything visible about how he occupied it. His face was angular and hard, carrying 3 days of exhaustion without appearing weakened by it. His eyes, when they moved to her, were dark and assessing and completely without warmth. He looked at her for a long moment. Then he said, "This is a joke." Zuri did not react. She had gotten the voice from the file, the flat, stripped-down cadence, the way he delivered statements that were meant as insults without bothering to inflect them as such. She had worked with difficult patients before. She had worked with men who used cruelty as a form of control, who pushed to find the edge of a person's composure and then leaned on it to see what would happen. "Good morning," she said. "I'm Zuri Bennett. I'll need about 20 minutes for the initial assessment. I want to do the standard neuro-eval before we talk about a treatment plan." "I said this is a joke," Ji-hwan repeated. He was looking at her the way people looked at something that had been sent to them by mistake. "Who approved this?" "Your fiancé arranged the placement. I can go through my credentials if you'd like, or we can use the time for the assessment. I'd prefer the assessment. I want to see what we're actually working with before the inflammation changes the picture." Something moved in his expression, something that might have been surprise, so briefly that she wasn't sure she'd seen it. "You're not Korean," he said. "No." You're American. Yes. You're... He stopped. There was something in the pause, a kind of recalibration. Plus size, she offered, because she had learned a long time ago that naming the thing people were trying to say without saying it had a way of deflating the power they thought they had with it. I know. You can also see I'm black and a woman, and probably not what you were expecting. I'm also the best physical therapist you've ever had, and right now you need me more than you need to make this conversation about my appearance. So, she set her assessment clipboard on the table beside the treatment bed. Do you want to get started, or do you want to keep going? The room was very quiet. Park, the bodyguard, had gone so still that Zuri could almost hear him recalibrating. Jihuan was staring at her with an expression she had not seen on him yet. Not warmth, not approval, nothing so simple as that. It was the expression of a man encountering something unexpected in a moment when he thought he had the whole landscape mapped. Fine, Jihuan said. His voice was the same flat register, but he moved his wheelchair toward the treatment bed without being asked again. And Zuri decided that was as much ground as she was going to get today, and it was enough. The assessment took 25 minutes, not 20, because Jihuan's case was more complicated than the sanitized file had suggested. The fragmentation pattern from the round was unusual. The piece that had lodged near the lumbar plexus had done damage to the L2 and L3 nerve roots, affecting both sensation and motor function in the right leg. But the distribution of the weakness was inconsistent in a way that nagged at her. Some muscle groups showed more degradation than she expected given the reported timeline. Others showed less. The inflammation response was genuine, but there was something else underneath it that she couldn't fully characterize yet. She noted it and moved on, because one session wasn't enough to build a picture. Jihuan submitted to the assessment with the compliance of a man who had decided that compliance was the strategically correct posture for now, and would revisit this decision at a later date. He answered her questions in the minimum number of words possible. He did not wince when she tested painful pressure points, which told her either that his pain tolerance was genuinely extraordinary or that he had practiced not reacting until the practice became the thing itself. On a scale of 1 to 10, she said, pressing carefully along the medial aspect of his right thigh. What's the pain level right now? 3. She raised an eyebrow. That's interesting because what I'm doing right now should be at least a 6 for most people with this level of nerve involvement. He looked at her. I said 3. I heard you. I'm noting the discrepancy. She released the pressure, made a mark on her clipboard. Either your tolerance is exceptional or you're managing the number you give me. Both are useful information. A pause. Why would managing the number matter to you? Because if you tell me 3 when it's an 8, I'll push you too hard and set you back. This isn't about how tough you are. It's about getting accurate data so I can make a plan that actually works. She looked up from the clipboard and met his eyes directly. I'm not here to be impressed by you. I'm here to help you walk. Jihuan looked at her for a long moment, then very quietly, 5. Thank you, she said, and meant it without making it into anything. The first week was hard and produced almost nothing visible. This was normal. Zuri knew it was normal, and she told him it was normal, and he listened to this information with the polite skepticism of a man who had spent his entire adult life in an environment where results were the only currency that mattered. They worked on basic neurological re-engagement, stimulation exercises, passive range of motion, careful progressive loading that was less about building strength and more about re-establishing the communication pathway between brain and muscle. It was the least dramatic form of rehabilitation work, and it required patience that Jihuan did not naturally possess. He was difficult in the specific way of highly competent people who had never been bad at anything they'd committed to. He pushed too hard, too fast, and when she corrected him, he went quiet in a way that was clearly displeasure rather than acceptance. He did not make the corrections immediately. He made them after a delay that communicated, without words, that he was choosing to comply rather than being told. She let him have the delay. It cost her nothing, and it gave him something to hold on to. What she noticed after the first week was that he kept showing up. He showed up exactly on time, every session, which in her experience was not guaranteed with patients who had the resources and power to simply not appear. He endured the frustrating early work without quitting. He asked questions, few, precise, technical, that told her he was actually thinking about what she was explaining rather than waiting for the monologue to end. On the 8th day, she got a very small voluntary contraction in the right quadriceps. Barely perceptible. A flicker. She told him what she'd felt. Ji Huan went absolutely still. He looked down at his leg with an expression she had not seen on him before, raw and unguarded and quickly sealed away. But she caught it, held it in her memory. Whatever that expression was, it was the real thing, underneath all the performance. "That's progress," she said simply. He said nothing, but he didn't look away from his leg for a long time. Han Seorin came to observe a session on the 11th day. She arrived with 2 of her personal assistants, sat in a chair at the edge of the room, and watched with the composed attentiveness of someone monitoring an investment. She was dressed impeccably, as always, and she smiled at Ji Huan when he looked over with the particular warm, assured smile of a woman who is very good at performing closeness. Zuri noticed that Ji Huan's affect changed when Seorin entered the room. Not dramatically. He was too controlled for drama, but he became slightly more contained, slightly more careful with his face. She filed that away. After the session, Seorin approached her while Park was helping Ji Huan back to the wheelchair. "He seems to be responding well to you," Seorin said. Her English was excellent, precise and lightly accented. "I'm glad. He can be resistant to new people." "He's working hard," Zuri said. "That's the most important thing at this stage." "I wanted to ask about the recovery tonic." Seorin produced a small glass bottle from her bag, amber liquid, faintly herbal smelling. "I had this prepared by a specialist, traditional formulation, adapted for nerve recovery. I've been giving it to him each afternoon. Have you noticed any effect?" Zuri looked at the bottle. "I'm not familiar with this preparation. What's in it?" Seorin smiled. "Various traditional compounds? The specialist is very trusted. He's worked with our family for years. I wanted to make sure you weren't concerned about any interactions with the rehabilitation work." "I'd want to see a full ingredient list before I can comment on that," Zuri said. Something shifted almost imperceptibly in Seorin's expression. Then the smile returned, unchanged. "Of course, I'll have him send it over." She tucked the bottle back into her bag. "Thank you for everything you're doing for Ji Huan. He needs people around him he can trust right now." She left with her assistants, heels precise on the polished floor. Zuri stood in the now empty rehab room and turned the exchange over in her mind. There was nothing specifically wrong with it, and yet, she thought about the inconsistent assessment findings from the first day, the muscle groups that were degrading faster than they should. She thought about the word the woman had used, trust. The second week produced clearer results. The flicker in the right quadriceps became a consistent voluntary contraction. Ji Huan began to show genuine improvement in his ability to sense position in the affected limb, a critical milestone for eventual weight bearing. His balance work, done lying down and then progressing to seated, was showing the kind of clean incremental gains that told her the nerve pathway was reestablishing rather than permanently blocked. She was genuinely encouraged. She told him so. 3 weeks ago, the doctors were talking about permanent impairment, she said, after a session that had gone particularly well. What we're seeing now doesn't support that prognosis. Ji Huan was sitting on the edge of the treatment bed, using a grip strengthener in his right hand, a habit he'd developed, something to do with his hands during cool down. He looked at her. "You sound surprised." "I'm not surprised. I'm confirming what I expected if the nerve root damage was incomplete, but I want you to understand what this actually means. It means the path exists. It doesn't mean it's easy from here. The work gets harder before it gets easier." "Good," he said, and he meant it. She could hear it. She was packing her equipment bag when she said, "The afternoon tonic. Has anyone given you the ingredient list?" Ji Huan glanced at her. "Seorin's preparation?" "She said she'd have the specialist send it over. I haven't received it." He was quiet for a moment. "Why do you need it?" Zuri chose her words carefully. "I want to make sure nothing in it is interacting with the recovery. Some traditional formulations include compounds that can affect muscle function or nerve conductivity." She paused. "How do you feel in the evenings, after you take it?" Something changed in his face. It was subtle. the kind of subtle that she was starting to learn to read, the minute recalibrations of a man whose face had been trained for years to give nothing away. He said, "Tired, sometimes weak. Is that new, since the injury, or before?" A longer pause. "Since. And in the mornings, before the session?" "Better." Zuri held his gaze for a moment. Then she said, "Can I take a sample of it for analysis? Routine precaution. I do this with any supplement a patient is taking." Jihuan looked at her with eyes that were doing something she hadn't seen from him yet. Not suspicion. Something more complex than suspicion. Something that looked, briefly, like a man staring at a closed door and wondering what was on the other side. "I'll have Park get you a sample," he said. "Thank you," she said. She zipped her bag, said good evening, and left. Walking back through the service corridor toward the gate, she felt the weight of what she hadn't said pressing against her sternum like a hand. She kept her pace even, her face neutral, her breathing measured. She did not know anything yet. She had a hunch and an inconsistency and a bottle of amber liquid she was going to take to a private laboratory first thing in the morning. She did not know what she would find, but something in the quality of the silence in that rehab room, the way Jihuan had looked at her when she asked how he felt in the evenings, the particular texture of that pause, told her that somewhere beneath his surface he might already know. Set down. The laboratory results came back in 48 hours. Zuri sat in her apartment in Mapo-gu on a Thursday night, the printed report on the table in front of her and a cup of tea going cold at her elbow, and read the findings 3 times to make sure she was reading them correctly. The tonic contained, in addition to its listed herbal components, a synthesized compound, not found in any traditional formulation, not naturally occurring, that was a known inhibitor of acetylcholine synthesis. At low doses, administered consistently over several weeks, it would produce progressive deterioration in skeletal muscle function. The effect would be gradual. It would look like complications from nerve damage. It would show up in certain blood panels as consistent with a worsening neurological condition. It would be, to any physician who was either incompetent or complicit, essentially invisible. She sat with that for a long time. There were things she understood about Kang Ji-hwan's world and things she did not, but she understood enough to know that what she was holding was not a medical problem. It was a power problem. Someone was poisoning the man who controlled one of Seoul's most powerful criminal organizations, poisoning him slowly and carefully, in a way designed to look like his body failing rather than being made to fail. And the person who had personally handed her the bottle and spoken warmly about trust was his fiancée. Zuri thought about what to do with this for a long time. She could go to the police. She dismissed this almost immediately, not because she was naive about what Jihuan was, but because she understood enough about the architecture of his world to know that the people she would be talking to might not be operating independently of that world. And because the moment she went outside the compound with this information, the situation became completely unpredictable in ways that could get her killed. She could leave, walk away from the contract, return to her practice, pretend she had never seen the report. The compound she had found was not fatal at current doses. It would take months more to permanently destroy his muscle function, and by then his organization would have removed him from power anyway. He would survive. He would just never walk again. She sat with that option for about 4 minutes, then she pushed it away. She had a patient who was being poisoned. She had evidence. She had an obligation, not a legal obligation, not a contractual obligation, but the kind of obligation that lived underneath all the other kinds, the one that didn't care about context or complication. She picked up her phone. She looked at the number Park had given her, the direct line, for scheduling changes and emergencies. She thought about Seorin's smile, the precision of it. She thought about Ji-hwan's face when he felt the first flicker of movement in his right leg. That raw, briefly unguarded expression that he had sealed away in under 2 seconds but had existed, had been real. She called the number. Park answered on the second ring. "I need to speak with him tonight," she said. "Privately. It's a medical matter and it can't wait." A pause. "Tonight is difficult." "I understand that. I also understand that in about 3 months, if nothing changes, he won't be able to stand up from that wheelchair with or without surgery. So tonight, please." Another pause, longer. Then, 9 o'clock. "Come to the side entrance." She hung up. She looked at the lab report. She looked at the cold tea. She thought about the fact that she was a physical therapist from Atlanta, sitting in an apartment in Seoul, about to walk into a crime lord's mansion and tell him that his fiancée was poisoning him with a synthesized neuromuscular blocking agent. She thought about the number of ways this could go badly. Then she folded the report, tucked it into her bag, and went to get her coat. The side entrance of the Kong compound at 9 in the evening was a different place from the side entrance at 8 in the morning. The light was different, harder, more deliberate, the kind of security lighting that was designed to eliminate shadow rather than create ambiance. There were more men visible, and the men who were visible moved with the alert economy of people who were actively working rather than stationing. Zuri went through a second security check, more thorough than the morning version, and when Park came to collect her, his face had the expression of someone who had made a decision they weren't sure about and were monitoring for signs it had been correct. He took her not to the rehab suite, but to a different room, a study on the second floor, wood-paneled, book-lined, a desk that had probably seen conversations she would never want to know about. Ji-hwan was there, in his wheelchair, dressed in plain clothing that looked deliberately casual in the way of powerful people who perform casualness. Two other men stood near the far wall, bodyguards she hadn't seen before, heavier and less visible than Park in their affect. Security she recognized as elevated. He had known something was wrong before she called. She could see it in the quality of his waiting. "Close the door," Ji-hwan said to Park. Park closed the door. He stayed inside it. Ji-hwan looked at Zuri. "Sit down." She sat. She took the lab report from her bag and set it on the desk between them without preamble. "I had the tonic analyzed," she said, 2 nights ago, when you gave Park permission to get me a sample." She watched his face. "What I found isn't a traditional compound. It's synthesized. It's a low-dose acetylcholine synthesis inhibitor. It blocks the chemical your muscles need to receive signals from your nerves. At the concentration in the tonic, taken daily, the effect is cumulative. It produces progressive muscle deterioration that's clinically indistinguishable from complications of your nerve injury." The room was very quiet. Ji-hwan had not moved. His hands were on the armrests of the wheelchair and they were completely still. His face had gone to a place she hadn't seen before. Not the controlled blankness he usually showed her. Not even the careful composure he deployed in sessions. This was something else. This was the face of a man who had suspected something and was now receiving the confirmation, and who was experiencing the confirmation as a physical event. "Your fiancé," Zuri said carefully, "gave this to me personally and asked me to confirm there were no interactions with the rehabilitation work." "I know who gave it to me," Ji-hwan said. His voice was very quiet. "I'm telling you because you're my patient and you have the right to know what's in your body. What you do with this information is your decision." She paused. "But I want to be direct with you about something. If you keep taking the tonic, the damage will become irreversible. The nerve pathway we've been working to reestablish will degrade faster than rehabilitation can compensate for it. You have a window right now, maybe 4 to 6 weeks, where stopping the compound and continuing the therapy can still produce full recovery. After that window closes, we're talking about permanent impairment regardless of intervention." Ji-hwan looked at the lab report. He looked at it for a long time without touching it. Then he said, "Who else have you told?" "No one." "Why not?" She met his eyes. "Because I needed to tell you first. And because I'm not naive enough to think the right move here is obvious." Something moved in his face. That thing she had caught before, that brief real thing behind all the performance. He said, very quietly, "You could have left." "Yes," she said, "I could have." The silence held. Outside the study windows, the Han River reflected the city lights in long, cold streaks. Somewhere in the compound below them, in the ordinary machinery of the household, Seoul was presumably in her rooms, composed and immaculate and waiting for a plan that was still, as far as she knew, proceeding exactly as designed. Ji-hwan looked at Zuri Bennett, the American woman he had dismissed in under a second on the first day, who had named his dismissal to his face and kept working, who had taken a sample of a bottle of poison and quietly gone to a laboratory and come back with a folded piece of paper that had just changed everything. "I need you to listen to what I'm about to tell you," he said, "and I need you to understand that what you decide to do with it will have consequences in either direction." She held his gaze. "I'm listening." He leaned forward slightly in the wheelchair. His voice dropped to something that was almost not a voice at all. "I suspected the tonic 3 days ago," he said. "But I didn't stop taking it. I needed them to believe the plan was working." He paused. "There are people inside Black Phoenix who are involved in this, not just Seoul. I don't know all of them yet." He looked at her steadily. "If I expose this now, before I know who they are, the ones I haven't identified disappear and regroup. I lose the only advantage I have, which is that they think they're winning." Zuri processed this. "So you want to keep taking it?" "No, I want to stop taking it, and I need you to help me do that without anyone knowing I've stopped." The room was completely still. "You want me to continue the rehabilitation while you secretly detox from the compound," she said slowly. "Attend the sessions as scheduled. Show visible deterioration to whoever is watching, while actually recovering. She breathed out slowly. "And if someone checks your blood levels, Dr. Lim is compromised. He won't check anything he's not told to check." A pause. "Are there private labs you trust?" "Yes. Then we monitor privately." He held her gaze. "I'm asking you to work inside a situation that is significantly outside the scope of what you were hired for. I'm asking you to keep a secret that puts you in proximity to something dangerous. And I'm asking you to trust that I will protect you while you're in this house." Zuri looked at him for a long time. She thought about the easy answer and the hard one. She thought about what it meant to trust this man who had dismissed her appearance in the first 30 seconds and occupied a world built on precisely the kind of violence she had spent her life keeping a clean distance from. She thought about a flicker of movement in a paralyzed leg and the raw, unguarded expression of a man who had forgotten, for 1 second, that he wasn't supposed to feel anything. "I'll do it," she said. "But I have conditions." He waited. "You follow the therapy protocol exactly as I said it. No shortcuts, no modifications, because you've decided you know better. If I tell you to stop an exercise, you stop. If I tell you the detox is taking longer than expected, you trust my assessment." She held his gaze. "You treat me as the professional I am. In every conversation, every session. What you said on the first day, that's the last time anything like that happens." A long silence. "Agreed," Ji-hwan said. And it landed differently from the way he usually spoke. Less like a decision and more like something being meant. Zuri stood. She picked up the lab report, folded it back into her bag. "I'll see you tomorrow morning," she said. "Same time." She walked to the door and Park opened it for her, and she walked back through the harder nighttime light of the compound toward the gate, and she did not let herself think too carefully about what she had just agreed to until she was in the car and moving away from the river, the city lights breaking open around her in every direction. Behind her, in the study with the heavy curtains, Kang Ji-hwan sat alone with the lab report and looked at it for a very long time. And somewhere in the same house, Han Seo-rin finished her evening tea and went to bed confident that everything was proceeding exactly as she had planned. She had no idea. The first thing Ji-hwan did after Zuri left was pour the remainder of that evening's tonic down the bathroom sink. He watched the amber liquid spiral into the drain and felt nothing in particular about it, or told himself he felt nothing, which was a different thing. What he actually felt was the specific cold clarity of a man who has been operating on suspicion and is now operating on confirmed fact, and the difference between those two states was significant. Suspicion left room for error, for misreading, for the possibility that he was wrong. Confirmed fact left room for nothing except response. He dried his hands. He wheeled himself back to the desk. He sat for a long time in the dark study with the city lights moving on the river outside. And he thought about 14 months of engagement, dinners, and public appearances, and the particular warmth Seo-rin had deployed so consistently and so precisely that he had never once questioned its architecture. He thought about that for exactly as long as he needed to. Then he stopped. Emotion was a resource like any other. You spent it where it produced returns. He picked up his phone and called a number that did not appear in any contact list. The man who answered was named Woo Chin-soo, and he had been Ji-hwan's private intelligence operative for 11 years. And he had the particular quality of someone who existed in the margins of situations, never at the center, never visible, but always present in the way that mattered. Ji-hwan told him 3 things: that he needed full financial surveillance on Han Seo-rin, beginning immediately, that he needed the names of every Black Phoenix executive who had met with her privately in the last 6 months, and that this operation was to exist nowhere in the syndicate's official channels. Wu asked no questions. He said he would have preliminary results in 72 hours. Ji-hwan ended the call. He looked at his right leg. He concentrated with the focused deliberateness Zuri had been teaching him, and produced a voluntary contraction in the quadriceps. Weak, effortful, but real. He held it for 3 seconds. Let it go. Then he went to bed, and in the morning he took his place in the wheelchair for Park's benefit, and for Seo-rin's benefit, and for the benefit of whoever else in this house was watching, and when Zuri arrived at 8 o'clock, she found him exactly where she expected him, performing the slow deterioration that everyone around him had been engineered to believe was inevitable. She was good at this, he realized, better than he'd expected. Not the therapy. He had already revised his assessment of her competence in the first week. What surprised him was how naturally she moved inside the deception. She arrived each morning and conducted sessions that looked, from the outside, like exactly what they were supposed to look like. A therapist working with a patient whose progress was frustratingly slow. She knew when Park was watching. She knew when the household staff moved past the rehab suite's interior window. On those occasions, she shifted her posture almost imperceptibly, and her voice took on a different quality. Still professional, but with a subtle undercurrent of concern that she aimed outward at whoever was watching, without making it performance enough to register as false. She was reading the room constantly and adjusting constantly, and doing both without appearing to do either. He found this more interesting than he wanted to. On the 4th day after their agreement, she arrived and set up her equipment, and then, without looking at him directly, said quietly, "How are the evenings?" "Cleaner," he said. He was on the treatment bed going through the passive range of motion sequence she'd started each session with since day 1. "Less fatigue." "Good. The compound has a half-life of about 36 hours at the concentration you were getting. You should be mostly clear in another week." "And the recovery?" "Faster than I'm showing anyone." She pressed carefully along his right hip flexor, measuring resistance. "You had a full voluntary contraction sequence this morning, didn't you?" He glanced at her. "How did you know?" "The muscle is more responsive than it was 2 days ago. You practiced." A pause. "Don't do extra work without telling me. If you strain something trying to accelerate this, the actual setback will look real to everyone, including me." He was quiet for a moment. "You're telling me to slow down." "I'm telling you to work at the pace I set. You agreed to that." He didn't like it. She could see that clearly. The set of his jaw, the particular stillness that meant he was overriding an impulse. But he said nothing else, and he followed the session protocol without deviation, and she marked his actual progress in the private set of notes she kept encrypted on her personal device rather than in the official file that Dr. Lim could access. The official file showed a man whose condition was worsening on schedule. The private file showed a man who was going to walk out of that wheelchair within 6 weeks if nothing went wrong. Something went wrong on the 8th day. She arrived at the compound to find the security check at the gate running 15 minutes longer than usual, 2 additional men on the perimeter, and Park waiting for her inside the entrance with his face locked into an expression that told her the temperature inside the house had changed overnight. "What happened?" she asked. "Not your concern," Park said, and walked her to the rehab suite without further conversation. Ji-hwan was already there when she arrived. He was in the wheelchair, and he was holding his phone, and the quality of his stillness was different from his usual controlled composure. This was compression, she realized. The stillness of something under very high pressure, contained by a structure that was working hard to hold. He looked up when she came in. "Close the door." She closed it. Park stayed outside. "One of my territorial commanders," Ji-hwan said without preamble, requested an emergency council meeting yesterday evening. He cited concerns about my ability to continue leading the organization given my medical condition. He set the phone down on the armrest. "His name is Director Kwan. He has been with Black Phoenix for 9 years. Zuri set her equipment bag down slowly. "Is he one of them?" "I don't know yet. Wu is working on it." A pause. "He may simply be opportunistic rather than part of the conspiracy. Men like Kwan don't need to be recruited into betrayal. They need only to see an opening." He looked at her steadily. "But the meeting request has been noted by the full Executive Council, which means the question of my capacity is now formally on the table." She understood what he was telling her. How long before it becomes a real problem? Weeks, not months. He picked up the grip strengthener from the side table and turned it in his right hand. The council operates on consensus. As long as the majority believes I'm functional, Kwan's motion goes nowhere. But if my condition continues to visibly deteriorate, more of them will start asking the same questions. He squeezed the grip strengthener once, released it. I need to be ready before that happens. Zuri looked at him. Ready how? Ready to stand up. In front of all of them. He held her gaze. Seo-rin is moving faster than I anticipated. Whatever she's planning, Director Kwan's meeting request was either timed to coordinate with it or it accelerated her schedule. Either way, I don't have the timeline I thought I had. She breathed out slowly. Ji-hwan, your nervous system needs time. I can push the protocol, but I can't manufacture recovery that the tissue isn't ready for. If I load you too fast and you re-injure, I know the risk. I don't think you do. Not completely. She crossed her arms. What you're describing, standing unsupported in front of a room full of people, requires not just motor strength, but proprioceptive stability. Your body needs to know where it is in space without thinking about it. Right now it doesn't. That takes weeks of specific work. She paused. Tell me honestly, how much time do you think we have? He was quiet for a moment. 3 weeks? Possibly 4? She did the math in her head. It was tight. It was not impossible. Then we changed the protocol, she said. More sessions. Twice daily if I can manage it without raising questions. And you do exactly what I say. When I say it, without the delay. Something shifted in his expression. That micro-adjustment she had learned to read as the closest he came to acknowledgement. The delay bothers you. The delay is you reminding me that you're choosing to comply rather than being directed. I understand why you do it. In this situation, it costs us both time we don't have. A silence. Twice daily, he said. Make it work. It was the second session on the third day of the new protocol, an evening session that officially appeared in the household schedule as extended physiotherapy, when Seo-rin came to the door. Zuri heard her voice outside before she saw her, the particular precise cadence of Seo-rin's speech carrying through the closed door. Park's voice responded, lower, and then the door opened and Seo-rin stood in the frame with her evening composure fully assembled, taking in the room with eyes that moved quickly and revealed nothing. Ji-hwan was on the treatment bed. He was performing. She had coached him in this, briefly, with the matter-of-fact efficiency of someone establishing ground rules, lying slightly slack, his right leg positioned to emphasize its limitations, his face carrying the controlled exhaustion of a man who is working hard and gaining little. Seo-rin looked at him. Then she looked at Zuri. I didn't realize there was an evening session scheduled, she said. We adjusted the protocol, Zuri said. 2 sessions daily to monitor a recent change in presentation. She kept her voice clinically neutral. If you want to speak with Dr. Lim about the specifics, I'll speak with you. Seo-rin stepped into the room and closed the door behind her. She moved to the side of the treatment bed and looked down at Ji-hwan with an expression that was carefully calibrated, concerned, intimate, and underneath both of those things, something else. Something watchful. How are you feeling? Tired, Ji-hwan said. His voice was exactly right. Flat, diminished, carrying the particular quality of a man whose energy was being slowly withdrawn from him. The sessions are difficult. You're pushing too hard, Seo-rin said, and glanced at Zuri. Is this pace appropriate given his condition? We're monitoring closely, Zuri said. I'd feel more comfortable if Dr. Lim was overseeing the schedule adjustment. Seo-rin's tone was perfectly pleasant. He has the full medical picture. Of course. I'll coordinate with him. Zuri held Seo-rin's gaze just long enough. I'll give you both some privacy. She stepped out into the corridor, where Park stood with his usual monumental stillness. She stood beside him and looked at the wall and listened to the muffled sound of Seo-rin's voice through the door. The tone of it, not the words. The particular quality of someone conducting an assessment while performing affection. Park said nothing. Zuri said nothing. They stood in the corridor for 4 minutes until the door opened and Seo-rin came out, adjusted her sleeve cuff once, and walked toward the main corridor without looking at either of them. Zuri went back in. Ji-hwan was sitting up on the treatment bed with the kind of controlled neutrality that she now recognized as what he looked like when he was running very hot underneath. "She told me the tonic specialist wants to adjust the formula," he said quietly. "She said the current preparation isn't working as well as hoped." Zuri looked at him. "She wants to increase the dose." "That would be my reading." The silence was cold. "Wu's surveillance," Zuri said. "Where is it?" "He sent preliminary results this morning. Seo Rin has had 7 private meetings with Director Kwan in the last 2 months. She has also transferred a significant sum to an account connected to Dr. Lim." His jaw was set in a hard line. "Kwan is part of it. The council meeting request wasn't opportunism." "How many on the council?" "Wu thinks 3 directors, possibly 4. He looked at his hands. "Out of 9. Zuri breathed. "So nearly half your executive council." "Not yet. 2 of the 4 are still unconfirmed." He looked up at her. "But the picture is becoming clear." "Ji-hwan." She kept her voice level and low. "If she increases the dose," "She won't, because I'm still taking it, as far as she knows." He met her eyes. "I need you to prepare a substitute. Something with a similar appearance and smell. I'll take the substitute in front of Park. He reports to me, but she watches him. I need the performance to hold." Zuri stared at him. "You want me to prepare a fake tonic?" "You have access to the compound's kitchen supply requests. Something herbal, amber-colored, similar viscosity. I'm a physical therapist, not a chemist. You know enough." A pause. "You knew enough to identify what was in the real one." She opened her mouth and closed it again. He wasn't wrong, technically. But the architecture of what they were building, the substitute tonic, the falsified session records, the parallel private recovery protocol, was getting more complex with each layer, and more complex meant more ways to fail. "If she tests it," Zuri started. "She won't test it. She's confident." He said it without particular bitterness. Confident people stop checking. Zuri looked at him for a long moment. Then she pulled her chair close to the treatment bed and sat down and lowered her voice further. "I need you to understand something," she said. "What you're describing, this whole operation, it only works if your recovery continues on track, which means the physical work can't slip, which means twice daily, full protocol, no exceptions, even when the security situation is getting worse and you're managing Wu's surveillance and monitoring the council and running everything else you're running." She held his gaze. "You're going to be exhausted, genuinely exhausted, and exhausted people make mistakes." He looked at her with eyes that were doing the complex thing they sometimes did, the thing she'd stopped trying to categorize. "I'm already exhausted," he said. "I know." She leaned back. "That's why I'm telling you this now, before it gets worse." He was quiet for a moment, then, "You chose to stay in this." "I know what I chose." "Why?" Not aggressive, genuinely asking in the spare, direct way he occasionally asked things when the performance fell away for a moment. She thought about the answer. Then, "Because you're my patient, and because—" She paused. "Because I've spent my career working with people who everyone else had given up on. I'm not interested in giving up on you because the situation is complicated." He held her gaze. There was something in his face that she had not seen before. Something that did not belong to the controlled architecture of a man who ran a criminal empire. Something quieter and more uncertain than anything she had witnessed from him yet. He looked away first. "The substitute tonic," he said, returning to the operational. "Can you prepare it by tomorrow?" "Yes," she said. "Good." He moved back toward the wheelchair without being helped. A small, deliberate thing that he had started doing in the last few days, the tiny daily insistences on function that were his version of stubbornness and his version of hope simultaneously. "Twice daily tomorrow, early morning and evening. I'll be here." She packed her bag and left him there, and in the corridor Park fell into step beside her as he always did, and she walked through the compound with the substitute tonic already forming in her mind and the weight of everything sitting across her shoulders like weather. She made the substitute the following morning before arriving at the compound. It took her 40 minutes and a trip to 3 separate stores to source the right combination: a base of barley water, chrysanthemum extract, and a small amount of licorice root that produced the right amber color and the faint bitterness that she'd noted in the original. The viscosity was close. The smell was not identical, but close enough for a casual inspection. She bottled it in a similar container and tucked it into her equipment bag. She was in the lobby of her building, bag over her shoulder, when her phone buzzed. The message was from a number she didn't recognize. 4 words in Korean, which she had learned well enough to read. "We know you tested it." She stood in the lobby for a moment, completely still. Then she took a slow breath, walked out, got in the car she'd called, looked at the message again. Someone in Seoul's network had been watching the laboratory, or someone at the laboratory had been paid to report. Either way, she had been identified. She thought about calling Ji-hwan. She thought about turning the car around. She did neither. She looked at the message one more time, and then she put the phone in her bag and watched the city move past the car window and thought about how the geometry of the situation had just changed in a way that could not be changed back. By the time she reached the compound gate, she had made her decision. She would say nothing to Ji-hwan yet, not until she understood more about who had sent the message and what they intended to do with what they knew. Telling him now, before she had anything actionable, would accelerate his timeline in ways that might force a confrontation before he was physically ready. She checked in at the gate. She went through security. She walked to the rehab suite. She set up her equipment. Ji-hwan arrived exactly on time, as he always did, and she began the session. And for the next 90 minutes, she was exactly what she had always been in that room. Professional, precise, focused entirely on the work. But the message sat in her phone and in the back of her mind like a stone in a shoe. And in the quiet moments between exercises, she turned it over and thought about the 4 Korean words and what they meant and who had written them. And she understood, with a clarity that sat cold and heavy in her chest, that the window she and Ji-hwan had been working inside had just become significantly smaller. Someone on the other side now knew she was not what she appeared to be. And in the world Kang Ji-hwan occupied, that kind of knowledge had only one logical destination. She told him that night. She had held it through the morning session and through the afternoon and through the substitute tonic handoff that went exactly as planned. Park watching from the doorway, Ji-hwan taking the bottle from Seoul's assistant with the passive compliance of a man who had accepted his routine. The whole performance clean and unremarkable. She had held it through the evening session, working him through the proprioceptive drills with the same focused precision she always brought, watching his balance improve in increments that nobody else in the building was allowed to see. Then the session ended and Park stepped out to take a call and she said quietly, "I got a message this morning. Someone knows I had the tonic analyzed." Ji-hwan went very still. She showed him the phone. He read the 4 words. He read them again. His face did not change in any dramatic way. There was no visible shock, no sharp intake of breath. But something shifted in the quality of his stillness, the way the air shifts before weather arrives. "When?" he said. "Before I came in this morning, I don't know who sent it." "I do." He handed the phone back. His voice was level and completely without temperature. "There's a man named Shin who manages Seoul's external contracts. He maintains relationships with certain service providers throughout the city, laboratories included." He looked at the middle distance for a moment. "She didn't send this to frighten you. She sent it to see what you would do." Zuri processed that. "A test. If you ran, she'd know you were compromised. If you came in anyway—" He stopped. "Then I'm either loyal to her or too committed to you to leave." She kept her voice flat. "Either way, she learned something." "Yes." "So what does she think she learned?" Ji-hwan was quiet for a moment. "That you're more involved than a therapist should be, which means you're either working for me or—" He paused, and something moved in his expression that she couldn't read. "Or she'll position it differently. A compromised therapist who has become personally entangled, easier to remove, less complicated to explain." The word remove landed in the room with a specific weight. Zuri looked at him steadily. "How much time does that give us?" "I don't know. Wu will need to find out how much Shin reported and to whom." He picked up his phone. "Go home tonight by a different route. Don't use the car service connected to the compound." "Ji-hwan, I'm not being dramatic." He looked at her directly. "I need you functional. That means I need you careful." She nodded once, packed her bag, left. She took 3 different routes home and checked twice that she wasn't followed, and stood in her apartment with the lights off for 10 minutes, listening to the city outside, before she accepted that she was alone and sat down and let herself feel, briefly, the full cold weight of what she was inside. Wu's call came to Ji-hwan at 2 in the morning. Park was outside the bedroom door. The house was quiet. Ji-hwan answered on the first ring and listened without speaking for 4 minutes while Wu delivered his report in the precise, affectless manner of a man transmitting data rather than telling a story. When Wu finished, Ji-hwan said, "All 4. All 4 confirmed," Wu said. "The 5th director, Baek. I'm still developing the picture, but the financial transfers are clean. I don't think he's involved. And the timing? The council meeting Kwon requested has been scheduled for 11 days from now. Seorin's legal team has prepared documentation. I obtained a partial copy." A pause. "Ji-hwan, the documentation includes a medical guardianship filing, full transfer of organizational authority pending your declared incapacity." The line was silent for a moment. "She moved faster than I thought," Ji-hwan said. "There's something else." Wu's voice shifted, not dramatically, but enough that Ji-hwan's attention sharpened. "The therapist, Bennett. Seorin's people ran a full background on her after the laboratory report. They know she's clean, no criminal connections, no prior involvement with any organization. But Shin has recommended to Seorin that she be removed before the council meeting." Ji-hwan said nothing. "Removed as in dismissed," Wu continued carefully, "or removed as in Shin didn't specify. He used the word neutralized. Seorin has not yet responded to the recommendation." "When was this conversation?" "Yesterday afternoon." Ji-hwan looked at the ceiling in the dark. He thought about Zuri Bennett walking through his gate every morning with her equipment bag and her unhurried professionalism and her complete refusal to be diminished by anyone in this building, and he thought about what the word neutralized meant in the specific vocabulary of the world he ran. "I want 2 of my people on her building starting tonight," he said. "Discreet. She doesn't know they're there." "Already arranged," Wu said. "I took the liberty." "Good." Ji-hwan ended the call. He lay in the dark and looked at the ceiling and breathed slowly and thought about 11 days and whether it was enough. It wasn't enough. He knew that clinically, the way he knew most hard things, not with emotion, but with the flat arithmetic of a man who had spent 20 years making calculations in situations where being wrong meant something final. 11 days was not enough time for Zuri to complete the proprioceptive work. He could stand with support. He had been doing that in the private sessions for 4 days now. Zuri's hand steady at his back, her voice giving him the precise, incremental instructions that were rebuilding the communication between his body and his brain. But standing with support was not the same as standing before the entire Black Phoenix Executive Council, while Seorin presented legal documents and declared him incapacitated. He needed to stand alone. He needed to stand long enough, and steadily enough, that there was no question in any mind in that room. 11 days. He closed his eyes. He ran the muscles of his right leg through the sequence Zuri had taught him, the mental rehearsal she had insisted on, the nighttime practice of simply imagining the neural pathway firing correctly, which she said was not superstition but documented neurological technique. He felt the leg respond in the dim, incomplete way it still responded, better than a month ago, not yet what he needed. He thought about what she had said to him. Exhausted people make mistakes. He thought about the word neutralized. He did not sleep until nearly 4 p.m. She arrived the next morning and he told her. He gave her the information the way he gave most information. Directly, without softening, watching her face as he said the word Wu had used. She sat in the chair across from the treatment bed and listened, and when he finished, she was quiet for a long moment. "Neutralized," she said. "Shin's recommendation. Seorin hasn't acted on it yet." "Yet." She looked at her hands, then back at him. "You have people on my building." "Since last night." She absorbed this. "You should have told me immediately. I'm telling you now." "That's not the same thing." Her voice was controlled, but he could hear something underneath it. Not fear exactly, but the particular strain of a person recalibrating a risk they thought they understood and finding it larger than they'd measured. I have a life outside this compound, Ji-hwan. I have colleagues, a practice, patients of my own. I know. If Seorin decides Shin's right, she won't. He said it with the flatness of a man stating a thing he intended to make true by force of will, which she recognized as different from a man stating a fact. She looked at him directly. You don't actually know that. A pause. No, he admitted. I don't. The honesty of it seemed to cost him something. She watched him sit with it, the rare visible discomfort of a man who ran everything and was accustomed to running everything and was currently unable to run the most critical variable in his own situation. 11 days, she said. Yes. She stood up. She moved to the treatment bed and set up the session without further discussion, because there was nothing useful to say about the 11 days except to use them. When she told him to stand, her hands positioned at his back, the balance board beneath his feet, he stood without the delay. No recalibration pause. No performance of compliance versus direction. He just stood. It was the first time he had done that, and she felt the difference in the quality of his effort. Something stripped of pride, purely functional, aimed only at the outcome. She kept her hands at his back and said nothing about it. On the 7th day, Wu sent a file that changed the picture entirely. Ji-hwan read it twice in his study with Park outside and the house quiet around him, and then he sat for a long time without moving. The file contained financial records that Wu had obtained through means that Ji-hwan did not ask about. They showed that the account Seorin had used to pay Dr. Lim was connected to a parent account that had been active for 3 years, long before the assassination attempt, long before the injury, long before any of what Ji-hwan had assumed was the origin point of her plan. 3 years. She had been planning this for 3 years, since before the engagement. The engagement itself was, Wu's annotation noted with the dry precision of someone delivering a structural assessment, almost certainly a component of the plan rather than a parallel development. Ji-hwan looked at the date the account was opened. He looked at it for a long time. He thought about where he had been 3 years ago, and who he had been with, and what he had believed about the architecture of his own life. He thought about the engagement dinner, the restaurant he had chosen, the ring he had commissioned, Seorin's expression of genuine-seeming surprise that he now understood as the performance of a woman who had been waiting for exactly this moment and had prepared the performance carefully. 3 years, 14 months of engagement on top of that. He set the file down on the desk. He picked up the grip strengthener. He squeezed it once, very hard, held the compression for 10 seconds, then set it down again with a precision that suggested a significant amount of force being deliberately controlled. He called Wu back. "The 4 directors," he said. "How long have they been coordinating with her?" "The oldest connection I've found is 14 months. Kwon was first." "So she recruited them after the engagement." "It appears so. She used the engagement as access." It wasn't a question. He was talking himself through the map of it. Getting inside the organization's social structure, building relationships with the council. Yes. Is there anything that connects this to the assassination attempt? A pause, longer than Wu's usual pauses. "I was going to bring this to you separately. I wanted to be more certain." Ji-hwan's hand stilled on the desk. "Tell me." "The team that executed the shooting in the Gangnam parking structure. I've been tracking the financing of their operation through secondary channels. The trail is deliberately complicated, but..." Another pause. "One of the payment nodes traces back to an account in Seorin's network." The room was very quiet. "She didn't just plan to take over after the injury," Ji-hwan said slowly. "She planned the injury. I'm not yet at a level of certainty I'd stake my life on, but the evidence is directional." Ji-hwan said nothing for a long moment. He looked at the window. He looked at the river. "Keep working," he said. He ended the call. He sat in the study for 40 minutes. He did not move. He did not call anyone. He simply sat and let the full weight of the thing settle into the correct places inside him, because he had learned a long time ago that the worst thing a man in his position could do was act from the first wave of any feeling, even rage, especially rage. She had tried to have him killed. When the killing failed, she had moved to the slower plan. The poisoning, the manufactured medical deterioration, the legal apparatus being assembled to strip him of everything he had built. And she had begun constructing all of this 3 years ago, from a position of patient, intimate proximity, wearing the face of a woman who loved him. He thought about the question Zuri had asked in the very first session. Will I walk the way I walked before? He thought about what Seoul had needed the answer to that question to be. He picked up his phone and sent Wu a single message. Full package. Everything you have. I need it documented and secured in triplicate by day 10. Then he wheeled himself to the rehab suite 2 hours before the scheduled session and waited. Boss. Zuri found him there when she arrived, and the look on his face told her something had shifted before he said a single word. She closed the door. She stood in front of him and waited. He told her about the financial records. He told her about the 3-year timeline. He told her about the assassination attempt. She listened without interrupting. Her face went through several things. He watched them pass. None of them performed. And when he finished, she sat down in the chair by the treatment bed and put her hands flat on her knees and looked at the floor for a moment. She tried to have you killed, Zuri said. Yes. And when that didn't work, she got engaged to you and started poisoning you. Yes? Zuri looked up. Her eyes were steady, but her jaw was tight in a way he had not seen before. And she knows I know. And she's considering having me... She stopped. Started again. 11 days. 4 now, he said. The council meeting was moved. Quan pushed the timeline. It's in 4 days. She stared at him. 4 days? Yes. Ji-Huan, I told you, the proprioceptive stability isn't... I know what it isn't. He looked at her directly. Tell me what it is. She stood up. She moved to the treatment bed, adjusted the balance equipment, and said, Stand up. He transferred from the wheelchair to the standing position, still slow, still requiring the careful, deliberate sequence they had rehearsed, and he stood on the balance board with her hands positioned at his back. She stepped back, removed her hands entirely. He swayed, recovered. His right leg shook with the effort of stabilizing, the muscles firing in the uneven, searching pattern of a nervous system that was rebuilt but not yet automatic. He held it for 8 seconds. Then she put her hands back. 8 seconds, she said. I need more than 8 seconds. I know. She stepped back and removed her hands again. Again. He stood. He held. His leg shook harder this time, fatigue accumulating, and at the 6-second mark his right knee buckled and she caught him cleanly, both hands at his ribs, absorbing his weight without staggering. They were very close. He could see the effort in her face, not physical effort, but the concentrated, almost fierce focus of someone who was refusing to let a thing fail. Again, he said. You need... Again. She looked at him for a moment. Then she stepped back and removed her hands, and he stood, and this time he made it to 10 seconds before the knee went, and she caught him again, and this time he stayed there for a moment, both of them breathing, her hands on his ribs and his hands gripping the parallel bars she had installed on the 3rd day, the whole complicated weight of the situation pressing down on both of them equally. 4 days, she said quietly. She hadn't moved back. 4 days. Then we worked through the night. She stepped back and picked up her notes. Her voice had shifted into the clean operational register she used when emotion had been processed and set aside, and what remained was pure function. I'll call the compound and say there's been a change in your vitals requiring overnight monitoring. Dr. Lim won't question it. He'll be relieved not to have to deal with it himself. Ji-Huan looked at her. You don't have to stay the night. I know. She met his eyes briefly. Stand up again. They worked until 2 in the morning. By the end of it, he could hold 10 seconds consistently and had reached 14 once, a single remarkable moment that neither of them commented on because commenting on it would have made it fragile. She called breaks with clinical precision, monitoring his fatigue with the same attention she brought to everything, refusing to let him burn the available reserves faster than they could rebuild. At one point, during a break, he said, When this is over, she looked up from her notes. When this is over, he said again, you should leave the compound. Leave Seoul if you want. I'll make sure you have whatever you need. She looked at him for a moment. Is that your version of a thank you? It's my version of acknowledging a debt. She looked back at her notes. Let's get through the 4 days first. He nodded. At 2:15, she set up a cot in the corner of the rehab suite, and he wheeled himself to his bedroom, and Park locked the corridor, and the house settled into its nighttime rhythms around the machinery of what they were building. At 3 in the morning, Wu sent Ji Huan a message. Seo Rin met with Shin tonight. Bennett has been scheduled for removal, day after tomorrow. I'm sorry, I needed to confirm before I told you. Ji Huan read the message. Read it again. Set the phone down on the nightstand. He looked at the ceiling of his bedroom and felt something move through him that was beyond rage. Something older and colder, the specific temperature of a man who has just understood that the most dangerous calculation he has ever made is not about his empire or his recovery or his enemies within the council, but about a woman sleeping on a cot in his rehabilitation suite who walked into his house to help him and is now 48 hours from being killed for it. He picked the phone back up and typed one message to Park. Maximum security on Bennett. Starting now. She does not leave this building without me. He put the phone down. Outside, the Han River lay black and still. And in 48 hours, Seo Rin's people would come for Zuri Bennett, and Ji Huan had 4 days to be ready to stand on his own feet and end this, but not in the quiet, surgical way he had planned, but faster and harder and in front of everyone, with no room left for strategy or patience or the luxury of a perfect moment. The perfect moment was gone. What remained was the only thing that had ever actually mattered, whether he could stand up when it counted, with the one person who had refused to let him fall still standing beside him. He told her at 6 in the morning. She was already awake when he came through the rehab suite door, sitting on the edge of the cot with her shoes on and her equipment bag packed, which told him she had been awake for a while and had been thinking about the kind of things that kept a person from sleeping. She looked up when he entered and read his face before he said anything, and he watched her read it, and neither of them pretended. How long? She said. Wu confirmed it last night, 48 hours as of 3 this morning. He wheeled himself to the center of the room. Which means today and tomorrow. She was quiet for a moment, then, the council meeting is in 4 days. Yes. So she wants me gone before the meeting, before I can... She stopped. Before I can say anything. Testify to anything. Yes. Zuri stood up. She picked up her bag, set it down again, picked it up once more, so... The small physical loop of a person whose body needed to do something while the mind caught up to a situation it had just been handed. Then she set the bag down for the final time and turned to face him. What's the plan? She said. Not a question, a demand. You don't leave this building. My security handles the external threat. Wu has already identified the 2 men Shin contracted. Park is managing containment. He looked at her steadily. And we move the council meeting. She stared at him. Move it. Forward. Today. He let that land. I'm calling the full council this afternoon. Emergency session. I'll tell them my condition has reached a critical inflection point, and I need to address the organization's future immediately. Ji Huan. Her voice was controlled and precise. You held 14 seconds last night. 14. You need to stand in front of 9 directors and convince them you're not incapacitated. I know what I need to do. You're not ready. I'm not going to get more ready. He said it without anger. It was simply the truth, flat and load-bearing. Every additional day gives Seo Rin another day to move on you and another day to shore up her position on the council. The advantage I have right now is that she doesn't know Wu has her financial records. She doesn't know I know about the assassination. She thinks she's still on schedule. He held Zuri's gaze. The moment I stop being on her schedule is the moment I stop being predictable. And unpredictable men are harder to manage. She looked at him for a long time. He could see her running the calculation. The medical reality against the operational reality, the gap between them, the question of which gap was more dangerous. You'll need more than standing, she said finally. You'll need to stand long enough to present evidence, respond to challenges, hold the room. That's not 14 seconds. That could be 10 minutes. I know. 10 minutes on that leg today after the night we just had. She exhaled through her nose. It's going to hurt. Genuinely. Not managed discomfort. Real pain. I know that too. She looked at him. Then we have 6 hours. She worked him harder than she ever had. No performance, no calibrated session for outside observers, just the 2 of them in the locked rehab suite, with the full protocol stripped down to its single essential component. How long could he stand? And what did it cost him? And how quickly could he recover enough to stand again? She pushed the intervals. She pushed the hold times. She stood behind him with her hands a centimeter from his back, close enough to catch, far enough to force his nervous system to find its own balance. And she counted seconds aloud in a voice that was completely without encouragement or sympathy, because encouragement and sympathy were not what he needed. What he needed was the work. And she gave him the work. By the third interval, his right leg was shaking continuously. Not the searching tremor of early neurological re-engagement, but the deep structural shaking of muscle pushed past its comfortable range into the territory where the body starts negotiating. He was sweating through his shirt. His jaw was set hard. She could hear his breathing, controlled on the inhale, deliberately extended on the exhale, the pattern she had taught him for pain management. 12 seconds, she said. He held. 15. He held. The legs shook harder. His right hand gripped the parallel bar in a white-knuckled compression that wasn't stabilizing anything mechanically, but was somewhere to put the effort. 17. His knees started to go, and she was there, hands at his ribs, and he found it again. A single savage reassertion of stability, the kind that comes not from muscle alone, but from something less quantifiable, the part of a person that simply refuses. And he held for 3 more seconds before she let him down. He sat on the edge of the treatment bed and breathed. His shirt was dark with sweat. His right hand was still tight on the bar, even though he was sitting down. 20 seconds, she said. He nodded once. Again, he said. She looked at him. The word again had sounded different that time. Not driven by pride or performance, but by something quieter and more absolute. She recognized it. She had heard it from patients before. The specific register of someone who had stopped fighting against their situation and started fighting through it. The distinction was everything. 3 minutes, she said. Then again. Us. At noon, Ji-hwan sent the summons to the full executive council. Emergency session, 4 o'clock. The Han River Mansion's primary conference room. Attendance mandatory. The language was terse and carried the particular authority of a man who had not asked for attendance but required it, and whatever the directors thought privately about his condition, the summons landed with enough residual weight that every one of them confirmed within the hour, including Kwon, including the 3 other compromised directors. Ji-hwan read their confirmations one by one at his desk, and Woo, on the phone, said, "Seorin has been notified. She's aware of the meeting." Her reaction? Controlled. She's been on the phone with Kwon for the last 20 minutes. A pause. She'll try to use the meeting. She has the documentation ready, the guardianship filing. My guess is she accelerates the presentation rather than waiting for the timeline she planned. Good, Ji-hwan said. Good? She'll be improvising. I won't. He ended the call. He wheeled himself back to the rehab suite. Zuri was waiting. She looked at his face and read the shift in it. The thing that happened when the planning phase ended and the execution phase began. 4 o'clock, he said. That's 3 hours. Yes. She pulled the chair in front of him and sat down, close, which she rarely did outside of the physical work. Her voice dropped. I need you to hear this clearly. What we've done in the last 6 hours is real. The progress is real. But the body has limits that willpower cannot negotiate past. If your leg gives in that room, in front of those people, then it gives, he said, and I deal with what's in front of me. That's not Zuri. He said her name for the first time. Not Ms. Bennett, not the impersonal functional address he had used for everything until this moment. She stopped. I understand the risk. I'm asking you to stand next to me anyway. The room was very quiet. She looked at him for a long moment. Something moved in her face, complicated, not simple, not the clean line of a professional decision, something that had been building in the space between all their sessions, and the particular intimacy of one person helping another person learn to stand, and the months of honesty in a house full of performance. I'll be there, she said. The conference room occupied the east wing of the mansion's second floor and looked out over the river through floor-length windows that caught the late afternoon light and threw it across the long table in cold horizontal bars. The 9 directors filed in at 4 o'clock with the careful, neutral expressions of people who had been summoned to something they each understood differently and were not yet willing to reveal how much they knew. Ji-hwan entered in the wheelchair. This was deliberate. He had discussed it with Zuri. The entrance, the positioning, the moment. She had listened and then said, "Let them see exactly what they think they're seeing until they don't." And he had understood what she meant. Park pushed the wheelchair to the head of the table. Ji Hwan sat with his hands on the armrests and looked at each director in turn. The slow, complete assessment of a man who had not forgotten how to command a room simply because he was sitting down. Several of them held his gaze. Several did not. Kwon sat at the far end of the table with the composed readiness of a man who had prepared for this, who had perhaps rehearsed it. He was 61 years old, broad-shouldered, with the particular self-assurance of someone who had decided that an outcome was settled and was simply waiting for the moment to become official. Seorin was not in the room yet. Ji Hwan noted this and said nothing. He opened the meeting with a statement about the organization's current operational status. Methodical, specific, demonstrating a command of detail that required no physical mobility. He watched the compromised directors recalibrate slightly as he spoke, the minor visible adjustment of people who had anticipated a weaker opening. Kwon's expression did not change. At 4:17, the conference room door opened and Seorin entered. She was dressed in charcoal gray, understated, carrying a leather document folder. Behind her came two people Ji Hwan did not recognize, a man in a suit who carried himself like legal representation, and a woman with a medical facility badge who was almost certainly the physician Seorin had sourced independently of Dr. Lim. She had brought her own doctor. She had come to make this official today. Wu had been right. Seorin looked at Ji Hwan and smiled. The particular smile of a woman who had arranged things carefully and was now watching them arrive at their destination. She took a seat midway down the table, positioned where she could address both the directors and Ji Hwan simultaneously. "I apologize for the interruption," she said. "I received word of the emergency session and felt it was important to be present, given my role in Ji Hwan's medical care." "No one invited you," said Director Beck, from the far side of the table. He was 70, small, and had been with Black Phoenix since before Ji Hwan inherited it. His voice carried the particular immunity of a man with nothing to prove. Seorin's smile did not waver. "Ji Hwan, do you want me to leave?" Ji Hwan looked at her. "Stay," he said. "This concerns you." Something moved in her expression, too fast to catch, gone before it could be named. She settled in her chair and opened the document folder with a small, precise motion. "Before we proceed," Kwon said, his voice carrying down the table with the deliberate projection of a man who had rehearsed this opening, "I want to raise formally, on behalf of several directors, the question of leadership continuity. Given the nature and duration of Ji Hwan's injury, and given the medical assessments provided by Dr. Lim," "Which assessments?" Ji Hwan said. Kwon paused. "I beg your pardon? Which assessments? Dr. Lim has produced 4 reports in the last 6 weeks. Which are you referring to?" A beat of silence. Kwon glanced at Seorin, a small, involuntary movement, gone quickly, but visible. Beck saw it. Ji Hwan saw it. "The most recent assessment," Kwon said, "dated 10 days ago, showing continued and accelerating neurological deterioration." "That report is falsified," Ji Hwan said. The room changed temperature. "I have Dr. Lim's signature," Kwon started. "I have Dr. Lim's bank records." Ji Hwan nodded to Park, who moved to the room's secondary door and opened it. Wu came in, carrying a document case. Behind Wu came 2 of Ji Hwan's most senior loyal operatives, and behind them came Dr. Lim himself. Not voluntarily, by his expression, but present. Lim stood at the edge of the room, looking at the floor. Wu placed the document case on the table and stepped back. "Inside that case," Ji Hwan said, "are financial transfers totaling 430 million won between accounts controlled by my fiancée and accounts belonging to Dr. Lim, Director Kwon, and 3 additional members of this council. There are also laboratory analyses of the herbal recovery tonic I have been taking daily for the past 6 weeks. The tonic contains a synthesized neuromuscular blocking compound. There are surveillance records, phone transcripts, and the partial financial record of the operation that funded the assassination attempt in the Gangnam parking structure 8 weeks ago." The room was absolutely silent. Seorin had not moved. She was looking at Ji Hwan with an expression that had changed. The composed certainty was still there, but underneath it something had shifted, a small seismic thing, a hairline fracture in the architecture. These are serious allegations, she said. Her voice was steady. Made by a man whose medical records show severe cognitive and physical deterioration. I have to wonder. She opened the document folder, removed a set of papers, slid them down the table toward the center. Whether the council is prepared to weigh evidence presented by someone whose capacity to accurately perceive and report reality has been medically compromised. The guardianship filing. Printed, signed, witnessed. Several directors looked at the papers. Several looked at Ji-hwan. Hwan leaned forward. I move that we table this evidence pending an independent medical assessment of Ji-hwan's current... No, said Baek. Everyone looked at him. No, Baek repeated, with the absolute economy of a man who had decided. We look at the evidence first, then we assess. Hwan's jaw tightened. He looked at Seo-rin, and Seo-rin, for the first time in the entirety of Ji-hwan's knowledge of her, made a visible mistake. She looked back at Hwan, just for a second. Just long enough. Every director at the table who had not yet understood the geometry of the room understood it now. Seo-rin set the document folder down. When she looked back at Ji-hwan, her expression had changed again. The performance had not collapsed. She was too controlled for collapse. But it had contracted, pulled tight around a different center. Not confidence. Calculation. The real-time calculation of a woman assessing which version of this situation she could still survive. She said, "You can't stand up." It landed in the room like a thrown object, deliberate, aimed. Whatever evidence you've prepared, she continued, her voice clean and certain, this organization does not follow a man who cannot lead it, who cannot stand before his own people. She looked around the table at the directors, not just her four, but all of them, appealing to something older and more fundamental than loyalty or money. I have watched him deteriorate for 6 weeks. I have been with him every day. His condition, said Zuri Bennett from the doorway. Every head in the room turned. She stood in the door frame in her professional clothes, her equipment bag over one shoulder, and her voice was the same voice she used in the rehab suite. Calm, precise, with the particular authority of someone who was the only person in the room who actually knew what they were talking about. His condition, Zuri said again, walking into the room, has been deliberately misrepresented by falsified medical records produced by a physician who was paid to misrepresent it. I have independent assessments, conducted privately over the last 3 weeks, that document his actual recovery trajectory. She set a folder on the table, so her private notes, printed, dated, countersigned by the independent laboratory. I'm his physical therapist. I have been with him every day. And his condition is not what you have been told. Surin looked at Zuri with an expression that had finally shed its last layer of performance. What was underneath it was cold and flat and entirely without the warmth she had deployed so consistently. You, Seo-rin said quietly. Me, Zuri said, and stood her ground. The room held its collective breath. Ji-hwan looked at Zuri, at the steadiness of her, the complete refusal to be anything other than exactly what she was. And he felt something move through him that was not rage and not grief and not the cold operational clarity he had lived inside for 20 years. He put his hands on the armrests of the wheelchair. He looked at Seo-rin. She saw what he was about to do. Something changed in her face. The first thing he had ever seen on her face that was purely reactive, unmanaged, real. Don't, she said. And it was almost a warning, almost a plea. Ji-hwan pushed himself to standing. It was not elegant. His right leg shook from the first second, the deep continuous tremor of muscle and nerve working at the absolute edge of their current capacity, and the pain was real. A grinding, radiating pressure that started in his hip and moved down through the reconstructed pathway like current through damaged wire. His jaw locked against it. His hands left the armrests and hung at his sides, open, unsupported. He stood. The room was the most silent it had ever been. 9 directors looked at him. Seo-rin looked at him. The legal representative and the physician she had brought looked at him. Park looked at him. Wu looked at him. Zuri stood 2 feet to his right, not touching him, close enough. 10 seconds. 15. His right knee was trembling with the effort of not buckling. His vision had a bright, compressed quality at the edges. The specific brightness of genuine pain demanding attention, being refused. He breathed. He extended the exhale. 20 seconds. He looked at the full council and said, in the flat, stripped voice that had run this organization for 15 years, "I am not incapacitated, I am not incompetent, and I am not finished." He looked at Kwan. "You are." He looked at the three other compromised directors. "All of you." He looked at Seo-rin last. She was perfectly still. Her document folder sat open on the table in front of her, the guardianship filing visible, suddenly looking like what it was. Paper, just paper, in a room where the man it was meant to bury was standing on his own feet and looking directly at her. "Han Seo-rin," he said. Her full name. Formal. Final. "You tried to have me killed. When that failed, you tried to do it slowly. You have been planning this for 3 years, from inside my house, from inside my life." He paused, not for effect, but because the leg was working very hard and he was managing it, and he would not let the management show. "I have everything, every transfer, every conversation, every order." The room did not breathe. Seo-rin looked at him for a long moment. The cold calculation in her face did not disappear, but beneath it, visible now in a way it had never been before, was something else. The look of a person standing at the edge of a structure that has failed and understanding for the first time that they built it on ground that was never as solid as they believed. She looked at Zuri. "You," she said again, quieter. The word had a different quality this time, not accusation, something closer to acknowledgement. The acknowledgement of a woman who had dismissed a person entirely and was now reckoning with the cost of that dismissal. Zuri met her eyes and said nothing. Ji-hwan's right leg was at its absolute limit. He could feel the edge clearly, not approaching it, standing on it, the single-step margin between standing and falling. Sweat was moving down the back of his neck. His hip was a grinding constant he was processing and setting aside on a second-by-second basis. He did not sit down. Director Baek picked up the document case from the table, opened it, and began to read. The room waited. And in that waiting, in the silence of 9 directors and the cold face of a woman who had run out of moves, something shifted in the architecture of the Black Phoenix Syndicate that would not shift back. A weight redistributed, a balance point moved, the invisible machinery of power registering a change that everyone in the room could feel but no one yet had words for. Ji-hwan stood at the head of the table on a shaking leg and burning nerve, and 2 months of work that had been done in secret, and at cost. And he did not move, and he did not fall, and the room held its breath around him like a thing that was waiting to see what kind of world it was going to be on the other side of the next few minutes. Director Baek read for 11 minutes. No one spoke. No one moved with any purpose. The legal representative Seo-rin had brought sat with his hands flat on the table and looked at nothing in particular, in the careful way of a man who had just recalculated his situation and was deciding how much distance to put between himself and his client. The physician beside him had closed her medical bag. Kwan sat with his jaw set and his eyes on the middle distance. The specific stillness of a man who has run out of moves and knows it, but has not yet accepted it. Ji-hwan was still standing. He was paying for it. The leg had moved past shaking into a deep, grinding endurance that he was managing breath by breath, the pain radiating upward through his hip in waves that he processed and released on the exhale with the focused precision Zuri had drilled into him across 2 months of sessions. She stood 2 feet to his right, not touching him, not looking at him. She was watching the room, reading the directors, her face neutral and alert. He was aware of her the way you were aware of the ground beneath your feet, constantly, without having to think about it. Baek set the final page down. He looked at Ji-hwan. "The laboratory analysis," Baek said. "Independent verification?" 3 separate facilities, Ji-hwan said. His voice was level. "Results are consistent across all 3. Baek looked at Dr. Lim, who was standing near the secondary door with his eyes still fixed on the floor. "Is this accurate?" Baek said. Not a question, a sentencing. Lim said nothing for a moment, then very quietly, "Yes." The word landed in the room and did not bounce. It simply settled, irreversible, into the record. Kwan moved. He pushed back his chair and stood with the controlled urgency of a man attempting to reclaim momentum from a situation that had already left him behind. These documents could be fabricated. Wu has been Ji-hwan's operative for over a decade. There's no independent... Sit down, said Director Beck. Quan looked at him. Sit down, Beck said again. Same tone. Same complete absence of heat. The tone of a man who had been in this organization since before most of the people in this room were adults, and who was done with the conversation. Quan sat. Seo Rin had not spoken since Ji Huan had stood up. She sat with the document folder closed in front of her now, the guardianship filing invisible beneath the cover, and she looked at Ji Huan with eyes that had finished calculating and arrived somewhere colder and more final. She was not going to perform anymore. He could see that. The performance was over, and what was left was the actual woman, stripped of its architecture, and she was not frightened. He had expected fear, and found instead something that looked more like a person accepting the specific weight of a gamble that had not paid. She had always been, he realized, fundamentally a realist. How long have you known? She said. Confirmed. 3 weeks ago. Suspected before that. The therapist. Yes. Seo Rin looked at Zuri for a moment. Something moved in her face. Not warmth, nothing so simple as that, but a complex thing. The look of a woman who had dismissed someone as irrelevant and was now conducting a precise post-mortem on that dismissal. I underestimated you, she said. Zuri looked back at her steadily. Most people do. Seo Rin nodded once, almost to herself. Then she looked back at Ji Huan. The assassination attempt, she said. You know? Yes. Then there's nothing left to negotiate. No, he said. There isn't. She picked up the guardianship filing from inside the folder and held it for a moment. Then she set it back down without tearing it, without any gesture of dramatics, with the same precision she brought to everything. I want legal representation before anything further occurs. I assume you'll allow that. My people will accompany you. You don't leave this building unescorted. She nodded. She stood. She looked at him one final time, and in that look, buried beneath everything else, was something he had not expected. Something that might have been, in a different life, genuine. Something that had existed alongside everything else, complicated and corrupted and ultimately insufficient, but present. He did not say anything to her. She walked to the door, and Park fell into step beside her, and she left the conference room in the same composed, immaculate way she had entered it, and the door closed behind her with a sound that was completely ordinary and also completely final. Chum. The council meeting lasted another 2 hours. Ji Huan sat down after Seo Rin left. He made no ceremony of it. He simply lowered himself back into the wheelchair when the standing had served its purpose and the leg had nothing more to give, and he conducted the remainder of the meeting from that position with the complete authority of a man who had just demonstrated that the chair was a logistical arrangement and nothing more. Quan and the 3 compromised directors were formally suspended pending full review of the financial evidence. Quan attempted a final argument citing years of service and the ambiguity of certain transactions, and Beck listened to it with the patience of a man waiting for a thing to finish, and when it finished, he said, You coordinated with his fiancée to remove him from leadership while she was poisoning him. Is any part of that incorrect? Quan said nothing. Beck said, That's what I thought. Dr. Lim provided a full accounting in exchange for terms. The accounting confirmed everything Wu had documented and added several details that hadn't appeared in the financial records. The specific dosing schedule, the projected timeline for permanent damage, the falsified reports submitted to the council over the preceding 6 weeks. He delivered this information in the monotone of a man who had decided that the only remaining variable he could control was the completeness of his cooperation. And he was thorough. By 6 o'clock, the immediate operational structure had been stabilized. Wu presented a transition plan for the affected territorial directorships. The 4 remaining loyal directors ratified it without extended discussion. Beck, who had not sought any position for himself throughout the entirety of the meeting, said only, Clean this up correctly. The organization needs to see this handled, not buried. Ji Huan looked at him. It'll be handled. Beck nodded once. He gathered the documents in front of him and stood. At the door he stopped and looked back at Zuri, who had remained in the room throughout. Present, quiet, occupying a chair to Ji Huan's right that had not been offered to her by anyone, but that no one had questioned either. Beck looked at her for a moment with the assessing eyes of a man who had spent 50 years reading people. Young woman, he said. What's your name? Zuri Bennett, you're a therapist. Yes. He looked at her for another moment. Then he said, good work, in the same uninflected tone he used for everything, and walked out. The room emptied. Park remained by the door. Wu gathered his documents with quiet efficiency. After a few minutes, it was just Ji Huan and Zuri and the long table and the evening light coming off the river through the floor-length windows, gray and quiet. Ji Huan looked at his hands. Sit down, he said, and then caught himself. Please. She sat. She had been on her feet since 6 in the morning, and it showed now, not in her posture, which remained straight, but in her eyes, in the particular quality of exhaustion that settles in after sustained high-alert tension finally releases its grip. She set her equipment bag on the floor beside her and rested her hands on the table. Neither of them spoke for a moment. Your leg, she said finally. It held. Barely. She looked at him. You were at absolute limit for about the last 10 of those minutes. I know. Any pain now? Yes. Where? He told her. She listened, catalogued it, nodded once. Nothing structural. Muscle fatigue and nerve irritation. You'll need ice and elevation tonight and you'll feel it for 3 days, but there's no damage. She paused. You did well. He looked at her. The phrasing, straightforward, unembellished, the same way she had said it after good sessions, landed differently here, in the aftermath of everything, and he felt its weight in a way he hadn't expected. You came into that room, he said. Yes. That wasn't the plan. No, she agreed. But Seoul was pivoting. She was going to make the entire case about your cognitive reliability, cast all the evidence as the product of a deteriorating mind. I had independent documentation, and I was the only person in the building who couldn't be bought or implicated. She paused. So I came in. He looked at her for a long moment. You understood what that meant. Coming in publicly, on record. Yes. Your practice, your position in Seoul, any future contracts. I understood what it meant, she said again, quietly and finally, the way she sometimes said things that were not open for continued negotiation. He was quiet. Outside, the river had gone dark under the early evening sky, and the city lights were beginning to emerge on the opposite bank, and the conference rooms sat around them like a space that had been the site of something significant and was now returning to being a room. I misjudged you, Ji Huan said. The first day. What I said. You did. I'm telling you that I know it. She looked at him. I know you know it. I've watched you know it for about 6 weeks. She paused. It doesn't require a formal statement. It does, he said. For me, it does. He held her gaze with the direct, stripped quality of a man who had spent his whole adult life using language operationally and was choosing not to do that now. You came here to do a job. I made it about something other than the job before you'd been in the building 10 minutes. You were right to call it. I was diminishing you because it was easier than adjusting my expectations. The room was quiet. Thank you, she said. Simple. Received. The weeks that followed were the hardest work of the recovery. The standing had cost him, and the cost was real. 3 days of genuine pain and reduced function that Zuri monitored with the same careful precision she'd brought to everything, keeping him in the protocol even as the urgency of the crisis receded, and the temptation to either push too hard or rest too completely both exerted their pull. She held the line on both. He had agreed to follow her lead, and he did, and the difference it made was measurable. Seoul's legal proceedings moved through a process that Ji Huan did not involve himself with directly. Once the evidence had been formally submitted, she had legal representation as she had asked for, and she was thorough in her defense and ultimately insufficient. The assassination financing was the element that closed every door. Kwon cooperated in exchange for terms. The 3 other directors did the same. The picture that emerged through the process was complete and brutal and left nothing ambiguous about the 3 years of patient construction she had undertaken. Ji Huan read the final legal summary in his study on a Tuesday morning and set it in the correct file and did not return to it. He did not feel what people perhaps expected him to feel about Seoul. He had done his grieving, if that was the word, and he wasn't sure it was, in the weeks before, in the long nights after Wu's calls, in the compressed silences of the rehab suite. What remained now was not grief and not rage, but a particular kind of clarity, the specific clear-sightedness of a person who has had an illusion removed and has adjusted to seeing without it. It was not comfortable. It was accurate, which was different from comfortable and more valuable. Dr. Lim lost his medical license and his freedom in the same week. Shin, who had arranged for Zuri's removal, was located through Wu's network and handled in the manner of things handled in Ji Huan's world, swiftly and without public record. Ji Huan did not tell Zuri the details of this, and she did not ask, in the careful unspoken agreement they had developed around the specific distance between her world and his. The day Ji Huan walked without the wheelchair, the parallel bars, or any assistance at all, it was a Thursday morning in late June. Zuri was setting up the session equipment when she heard the door open and looked up and saw him standing in the door frame on his own feet, one hand resting lightly on the frame, not for balance but as a precautionary contact, the touch of a man who knew the difference between needing support and choosing caution. She straightened. She looked at him. He walked into the room. It was not the walk of a man who had never been injured. There was a slight asymmetry in the right stride, a careful quality to the weight transfer that would probably never entirely disappear. But it was a walk. Continuous, self-directed, unassisted. He crossed the rehab suite and stopped in front of her and stood, and his right leg held, and the only evidence of effort was a slight tightness around his eyes. She looked at him for a long moment. "How does it feel?" she said. He considered this with the genuine thoughtfulness he had started bringing to her questions somewhere around week 6, the quality of a man who had learned to take the medical inquiry seriously. "Different," he said. Then I remembered. A pause. "Better?" She nodded. She made a note. She set the clipboard down. "You don't need me anymore," she said. Not sad, factual, the way she was factual about most things. "Another 3 months of home exercises, the protocol I'll leave with you, and you'll be at full functional recovery. The asymmetry in the right stride may persist. We should discuss whether further intervention is warranted or whether it's simply the new baseline." He looked at her. "Is that your notice?" She met his eyes. "It's the clinical reality." "Those are different things." She was quiet for a moment. The morning light came through the rehab suite's single window and caught the room in a particular way. The same room where she had run her first assessment on a man who had dismissed her in under a minute, and then proceeded to be, beneath all of it, someone entirely more complicated and more real than the file had described. "I have a practice," she said. "Patients I've been managing remotely for 3 months. A lease in Mapogu that I've been paying for while I've essentially been living out of an equipment bag." She paused. "My life didn't disappear while I was in here." "No," he said, "it didn't." So the question of what happens next is, she stopped, started again. It's not a clinical question. He took a single step toward her. He was careful about it, measured, deliberate, one of many steps he had taken in this room over the preceding months, each one costing something and producing something in return. He stopped at a distance that was closer than professional and further than anything he had allowed himself before. "I'm asking what you want," he said, "not what makes clinical sense. Not what's practical." He looked at her steadily. "You came into that conference room when you didn't have to. You were in this building for 3 months, running a deception operation inside a criminal enterprise, because a man who insulted you on the first day asked you to stay." He paused. "I want to know what you want from what's on the other side of all that." She looked at him for a long time. She thought about what it meant to want something from a man like this, not naively, not without a clear accounting of what his world was, and what it cost, and what it would continue to cost. She had not spent 3 months in this building without developing a precise understanding of what Ji Huan's life contained, the violence at its edges, the moral weight of what he ran, the distance between his world and the one she had built for herself around care and recovery, and the basic human work of helping people function. She thought about all of that. She also thought about a man who had voluntarily returned to a harder truth when she asked him a second time on the first day, who had said 5 instead of 3 because she explained why accuracy mattered more than performance. She thought about the way he had looked at his leg when the first voluntary contraction came back. That brief, raw, sealed-away look that was the most honest thing she had seen from him, until many more honest things followed it. She thought about the way he had said her name for the first time on the afternoon of the worst day, and what it had meant that he had chosen that moment to stop calling her Ms. Bennett. "I want honesty," she said. "Not the operational kind, the other kind. The kind that's harder." She held his gaze. "I want to be treated as your equal in every room, not just this one. I want to know when something involves my safety before it becomes critical. And I want you to understand that I'm not going to reshape myself into whatever fits most conveniently beside you." She paused. "If those are things you can do, then I want to see what this is." He was quiet for a moment. She watched him take the full weight of what she had said, not performing consideration, actually considering. "The honesty," he said. "I'll work at it. I won't tell you I'm practiced at it." "I know." "The equal, yes," without qualification. He said it the way he had said agreed in the study on the night she had brought him the lab report, less like a concession and more like a thing being meant. "Your safety, I should have told you immediately. That was wrong." "Yes," she said. "It was." "It won't happen again?" She looked at him for one more moment, then she said, "Your stride asymmetry. I want to address it before we close the official protocol. It'll take another 2 weeks." The corner of his mouth moved. It was small and brief, and entirely unlike the controlled expressions she had cataloged across 3 months. 2 weeks, he said. 2 weeks, she confirmed. She picked up her clipboard. She turned to the session equipment. He watched her, and the morning light held the room in its quiet way. And outside, the Han River moved past in its indifferent, continuous manner, carrying the city's reflection on its surface without comment. The 2 weeks became a month. The month became the summer. Ji Huan walked the length of the Han River riverside path on a Saturday morning in August. Not the full path. Not yet. 3 kilometers out, and 3 back with Zuri beside him and 2 of Park's men at a discreet distance behind them. His gait had smoothed. The asymmetry was still present if you knew to look for it. A slight favoring in the right stride under fatigue, but under normal conditions. To anyone watching, it was simply a man walking along the river on a summer morning. They walked mostly without talking. This was something they had developed, the ability to occupy the same space without filling it, which was rarer than it sounded and more comfortable than most things Ji Huan had experienced with another person. At the turnaround point, where the path curved around a small park and the river widened into a long silver reach, Zuri stopped and looked at the water. "My first week in Seoul," she said, "I walked along this river, different section. I didn't know anyone. I just landed and I didn't know if I'd made a catastrophic mistake or the best decision of my life. And I walked along the river because I didn't know what else to do." He stood beside her and looked at the water. "Which was it?" he said. She was quiet for a moment. "I'm still deciding." She paused. "Ask me again in a year." He looked at her profile. The particular steadiness she carried, the quality of a person who had been underestimated so many times that they had simply stopped organizing their sense of themselves around other people's assessments. He thought about who she was and what she had walked into and what she had chosen each time with full understanding of the cost. He thought about what it meant to be seen clearly by someone, not the version of yourself that you projected, not the reputation that preceded you into every room, but the actual thing, the wounded and imperfect and still working thing, and to have that person stay anyway. "I judged you before you spoke a single word," he said. "I decided what you were based on what you looked like, and I was wrong in every way it's possible to be wrong about a person." She turned and looked at him. "I know why you're telling me this," she said, "and I'm not asking you to keep revisiting it." "I'm not revisiting it. I'm stating it once, clearly, so it's been said." He held her gaze. "You deserved better than the beginning of this." She looked at him for a moment. The river moved behind her, the summer light flat and bright on the water. "Yes," she said. "I did. I can't change the beginning." "Nobody can change the beginning." She turned back to the water. "That's why what comes after matters more." He stood beside her and they looked at the river together, and the city moved around them in its ordinary Saturday morning way, indifferent to the specific weight of what had been built and burned and rebuilt in the months preceding this moment, and the water caught the light and released it in the way that water always did, continuous and without memory. After a while, she said, "Ready?" He tested his right leg, the private habit he had developed, the brief check-in with the part of himself that had been the site of everything. It answered back steady and functional and present. Yes, he said. They turned and walked back the way they had come, side by side, at a pace that suited them both, and the river ran alongside them in its long silver reach, and the city held them in its noise and its indifference, and nothing about either of them looked like what the world had been so certain they were. That was the end of it. Not an ending where everything was simple or clean or without the residue of what it had cost. Not an ending where the man who ran Black Phoenix Syndicate had become something other than what he was, or where the woman who had walked into his house with an equipment bag had stopped being a person with her own life and her own complications and her own clear-eyed understanding of exactly what she had chosen to be beside. Just two people who had survived something together, walking along a river in the summer, going back the way they came.